Title: 4 Early Signs She Will Never Meet Your Relationship Standards. Introduction. Approximately equal to 350 words. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep investing my heart, my time, and my purpose into relationships that drain me instead of build me? My brother, that question is not accidental. It is the whisper of discernment that God places in a man before destruction comes. Scripture tells us in Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Yet too many men hand their hearts to someone simply because they are attracted, lonely, or afraid of being alone. We live in a generation where standards are mocked and discernment is called insecurity. Men are told to accept anything, tolerate everything, and suppress their God-given authority just to keep a woman around. But let me tell you this plainly. God did not create you to beg for peace, to negotiate for respect, or to shrink your calling so someone else feels comfortable. A relationship is not just about chemistry, it is about alignment. Amos 3:3 asks, can two walk together unless they are agreed? If there is no agreement in values, character, and direction, then all the attraction in the world will not save you. It will only delay the pain. Early signs are mercies from God. They are warnings, not punishments. The problem is not that men don't see the signs. The problem is that they ignore them, hoping love will change what character refuses to correct. But hear me clearly, what you tolerate early, you will suffer under later. This message is not about condemning women, it is about protecting men. It is about teaching you how to recognize early on when a woman is simply incompatible with the standards God has called you to live by. Because when a man has standards rooted in faith, discipline, and purpose, he cannot afford to be emotionally entangled with someone who pulls him away from God instead of closer to him. So listen carefully, not with desperation, but with wisdom, not with emotion, but with discernment. Because your future, your peace, and your purpose depend on it. Hashtag Keynote 1, she disrespects your values and calls IT being real. If she mocks your faith, belittles your discipline, or treats your moral boundaries like they are weaknesses, that is not honesty, that is disrespect. A woman who cannot honor what you stand for will eventually try to dismantle it. Hashtag Keynote 2, she thrives on chaos, not peace. God is a God of order, not confusion. If drama follows her everywhere, if conflict excites her more than resolution, understand this, peace is your standard, not something you should have to fight for daily. Hashtag Keynote 3, she expects provision but rejects accountability. When a woman wants the benefits of leadership but refuses responsibility, imbalance is guaranteed. A relationship without mutual accountability becomes exploitation, not partnership. Hashtag Keynote 4, she competes with you instead of supporting you. A godly relationship is not a battleground for dominance. If she resents your growth, undermines your authority, or turns everything into a power struggle, she is not aligned with your calling. Hashtag Keynote 5, she ignores boundaries and tests how much you'll tolerate. Boundaries reveal character. If she consistently pushes your limits, disregards your no, or manipulates your emotions, understand this, she is showing you who she is. Believe her. Conclusion. My brother, standards are not arrogance, they are obedience. God never called you to settle. He called you to lead, to discern, and to choose wisely. The right woman will not fight your standards. She will respect them. She will not drain your peace. She will multiply it. Remember this, loneliness is temporary, but a wrong relationship can delay your destiny for years. Guard your heart, honor your calling, and never ignore the early signs God reveals. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep investing my heart, my time, and my purpose into relationships that drain me instead of build me? My brother, that question is not accidental. It is the whisper of discernment that God places in a man before destruction comes. Scripture tells us in Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Yet too many men hand their hearts to someone simply because they are attracted, lonely, or afraid of being alone. We live in a generation where standards are mocked and discernment is called insecurity. Men are told to accept anything, tolerate everything, and suppress their God-given authority just to keep a woman around. But let me tell you this plainly, God did not create you to beg for peace, to negotiate for respect, or to shrink your calling so someone else feels comfortable. A relationship is not just about chemistry, it is about alignment. Amos 3:3 asks, can two walk together unless they are agreed? If there is no agreement in values, character, and direction, then all the attraction in the world will not save you. It will only delay the pain. Early signs are mercies from God. They are warnings, not punishments. The problem is not that men don't see the signs. The problem is that they ignore them, hoping love will change what character refuses to correct. But hear me clearly, what you tolerate early, you will suffer under later. This message is not about condemning women. It is about protecting men. It is about teaching you how to recognize early on when a woman is simply incompatible with the standards God has called you to live by. Because when a man has standards rooted in faith, discipline, and purpose, he cannot afford to be emotionally entangled with someone who pulls him away from God instead of closer to him. So listen carefully, not with desperation, but with wisdom, not with emotion, but with discernment, because your future, your peace, and your purpose depend on it. When a woman disrespects your values and then disguises that disrespect as being real, you are witnessing one of the earliest and clearest warning signs that she will never meet your relationship standards. Values are not opinions that change with mood. They are convictions that shape behavior, decisions, and direction. When a man stands on faith, discipline, moral boundaries, and purpose, he is standing on something sacred. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 119, "Blessed are those whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord." If someone consistently challenges, mocks, or minimizes the principles you live by, they are not simply expressing themselves. They are revealing misalignment at the core. Disrespect often begins subtly. It shows up as jokes about your faith, eye rolls when you talk about discipline, sarcasm when you mention boundaries, or comments that frame your standards as outdated, insecure, or controlling. She may say things like, "You're too serious," or "Why are you so rigid?" or "Everyone does this, why can't you relax?" These statements are not harmless. They are attempts to soft and your backbone so her comfort can take priority over your convictions. Over time, what begins as teasing becomes pressure, and pressure eventually turns into resentment. A woman who truly respects you may not share every value at first, but she will honor them. She will be curious, not contemptuous. She will seek understanding, not dominance. The moment she starts labeling your standards as flaws is the moment she positions herself above them. Proverbs 14:12 warns us that there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Ignoring this sign feels easier in the moment because attraction clouds judgment, but compromise at the level of values always demands a heavier payment later. What makes this sign especially dangerous is that it often appeals to a man's desire to be accepted. Many men lower their standards not because they stop believing in them, but because they fear losing the relationship. But hear this clearly. If maintaining your values costs you a woman, then losing her is not a loss. It is protection. Jesus himself said in Matthew 7:16, "By their fruit you will recognize them." Disrespect for your values will eventually produce fruit in the form of constant conflict, emotional manipulation, and spiritual erosion. Over time, staying with someone who undermines your values will slowly disconnect you from who God called you to be. You will begin to explain instead of lead, justify instead of stand firm, and negotiate instead of obey. Ace will fade, conviction will weaken, and confusion will take its place. A relationship that requires you to abandon your principles to keep harmony is not love, it is bondage. God never calls a man to sacrifice his integrity for companionship. When she disrespects your values and calls it being real, believe what you are seeing. That sign is not small, and it will not disappear with time, it will only grow. When a woman thrives on chaos rather than peace, you are looking at a spiritual and emotional mismatch that will slowly wear down your strength, your clarity, and your purpose. God is a God of order, not confusion, and where his presence is honored, peace follows. Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 14:33, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace." When a relationship feels constantly turbulent, unpredictable, and emotionally exhausting, that is not passion, that is disorder. Peace should not be something you chase in a relationship. It should be the environment you grow in. Chaos often disguises itself as excitement. She may frame constant arguments as passion, emotional outbursts as honesty, and instability as just how I am. But patterns do not lie. If every week brings a new conflict, a new crisis, or a new emotional storm, you must ask yourself why drama seems to follow her wherever she goes. A woman who thrives on chaos feels uncomfortable when things are calm. Silence makes her restless. Stability feels boring, and peace feels unfamiliar. As a result, she unconsciously creates problems just to feel alive. For a man of standards, this becomes spiritually draining. Instead of focusing on your mission, your growth, and your walk with God, your energy is constantly redirected toward managing emotions, repairing damage, and and restoring balance. Proverbs 17:1 tells us, "Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife." Yet many men ignore this wisdom because they mistake intensity for connection. What they don't realize is that chaos trains you to live in survival mode, not purpose mode. Over time, constant disorder reshapes your behavior. You begin to walk on eggshells, choosing your words carefully, suppressing truth to avoid conflict, and delaying decisions to keep temporary peace. Ironically, in trying to avoid chaos, you lose your leadership. A man cannot lead effectively when he is always reacting. God designed men to be builders, protectors, and vision carriers, not emotional firefighters. A woman who values peace does not avoid difficult conversations, but she approaches them with maturity, self-control, and respect. Chaos-driven behavior lacks accountability. Arguments go in circles, apologies are rare or conditional, and resolution never truly comes. Instead, old issues are recycled, reopened, and reused as weapons. This cycle erodes trust and replaces intimacy with tension. The danger of staying in such a dynamic is that chaos becomes normal. What once felt exhausting begins to feel familiar. You may even start to believe that calm relationships are unrealistic or boring, but that belief is a lie born from prolonged exposure to disorder. Galatians 5:22 reminds us that the fruit of the Spirit includes peace and self-control. If those fruits are consistently absent, you are not witnessing a phase. You are witnessing character. A relationship that robs you of peace will eventually rob you of clarity, confidence, and direction. God never calls a man to sacrifice his inner peace to keep someone else emotionally comfortable. When a woman thrives on chaos instead of peace, that is not something time will fix or love will heal. It is an early sign that your standards and her nature are moving in opposite directions. When a woman expects provision but rejects accountability, the foundation of a healthy relationship is already cracked. God designed relationships with balance, order, and responsibility on both sides. Leadership and provision were never meant to exist without respect, cooperation, and accountability. Scripture makes this clear in Luke 12:48. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. When someone demands the benefits of commitment, protection, time, emotional investment, or financial support, but resists responsibility, growth, or correction, that imbalance will eventually turn into resentment. This sign often appears early, but it is frequently ignored. She may speak confidently about what she deserves while showing a concern for what she contributes. She may expect you to plan, pay, protect, initiate, and sacrifice, yet react offensively when asked to reflect, adjust, or take ownership of her actions. Accountability feels like an attack to her, not an opportunity to grow. Any attempt to address issues is labeled as control, judgment, or lack of love. But real love does not avoid truth, it stands on it. A man of standards understands that provision is not just about money. It is about emotional presence, spiritual covering, stability, and leadership. When those offerings are met with entitlement instead of appreciation, the dynamic shifts from partnership to obligation. Proverbs 18:22 tells us that finding a wife is finding a good thing, not a burden. If giving begins to feel demanded rather than honored, something is fundamentally misaligned. Over time, lack of accountability poisons trust. Problems are never resolved because responsibility is always deflected. Mistakes are justified, patterns are excused, and blame is shifted. You may hear phrases like, "That's just how I am," or "You're overreacting," or "If you really loved me, you wouldn't bring this up." These are not expressions of vulnerability, they are shields against growth. A woman who refuses accountability cannot build with you because building requires correction, humility, and shared responsibility. Spiritually, this dynamic is dangerous. A man begins to overextend himself, believing it is his duty to carry everything. But God never called men to enable dysfunction. Galatians 6:5 reminds us that each person should carry their own load. When one person consistently avoids responsibility, the relationship becomes unbalanced. And imbalance always produces frustration, exhaustion, and emotional distance. As time passes, provision without accountability creates entitlement. What was once appreciated becomes expected. Gratitude fades and demands increase. The man is no longer valued for who he is, but for what he provides. His worth becomes transactional. This is not love, it is consumption. And no man can sustain that without losing himself in the process. A healthy woman welcomes accountability because she understands it leads to growth. She takes responsibility for her words, her reactions, and her choices. She does not fear correction because she is secure in her character. When accountability is rejected, it reveals immaturity, not independence. If a woman wants the rewards of commitment but resists the responsibility that comes with it, believe what you are seeing. That sign does not improve with time, it deepens. When a woman competes with you instead of supporting you, the relationship shifts from partnership to rivalry, and that is a dangerous place for any man with purpose. God never designed relationships to be arenas where egos clash for dominance. From the beginning, Scripture shows us that unity, not competition, is the foundation of strength. Ecclesiastes 4:9 reminds us, two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. When competition replaces cooperation, both people lose, but the man often loses his leadership first. This sign reveals itself in subtle ways. She may minimize your achievements, respond to your progress with indifference, or change the conversation when your growth is mentioned. Instead of encouragement, you receive comparison. Instead of pride in your success, you feel tension. When you step forward, she pulls back emotionally. When you advance in your calling, she treats it like a threat rather than a shared victory. Over time, this creates an environment where you feel guilty for becoming more of who God called you to be. A supportive woman sees your growth as an investment in the future you are building together. A competitive woman sees it as a loss of control or relevance. Rather than asking how she can support the vision, she questions it, challenges it unnecessarily, or attempts to redirect your focus back to her insecurities. Proverbs 2:17 tells us that iron sharpens iron, but competition dulls trust. Instead of sharpening you, she slowly chips away at your confidence. This dynamic often leads a man to shrink himself to preserve harmony. He stops sharing goals, delays decisions, and downplays success to avoid conflict. But a man who has to dim his light to keep peace is not in a healthy relationship. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, "Let your light shine before others." A relationship that pressures you to hide your light is not aligned with God's design. Competition also shows up in decision-making. She resists your leadership not through wisdom or dialogue, but through power struggles. Every choice becomes a debate, every direction becomes contested, and every disagreement turns into a test of control. Instead of unity, there is constant tension over who leads and who follows. Leadership is not about superiority, it is about responsibility. When leadership is constantly challenged for the sake of ego, progress becomes impossible. Over time, this rivalry erodes intimacy. Trust weakens because vulnerability feels unsafe. You begin to protect your dreams instead of sharing them. Emotional distance grows, not because love is gone, but because competition has replaced alignment. Galatians 5:26 warns us not to provoke or envy one another, because envy poisons relationships quietly but thoroughly. A woman who supports you does not lose herself by doing so. She grows alongside you, not against you. She celebrates your wins because she understands that your success strengthens the relationship, not diminishes her value. When a woman competes with you instead of supporting you, she is revealing that she values control more than connection. That is not a phase, and it is not something love can correct. It is a sign of misalignment that will only intensify with time. When a woman ignores boundaries and consistently tests how much you will tolerate, she is revealing a deep issue with respect, self-control, and character. Boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are lines that protect what is valuable. God himself establishes boundaries, and throughout Scripture we see that obedience to limits brings life, while the rejection of them brings destruction. When someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries and then downplays it, laughs it off, or turns it back on you, that behavior is not accidental. It is a test. Boundary testing often begins small. She may dismiss your need for space, pressure you to move faster than you are comfortable with, or repeatedly do things you have clearly expressed concern about. When confronted, she may respond with phrases like, "You're too sensitive," or "If you really cared, you wouldn't have a problem with this." These responses are not expressions of love. They are attempts to condition you to abandon your limits for her comfort. Over time, these small violations set the stage for larger ones. A man who does not enforce boundaries teaches others how to treat him. Proverbs 2:5-28 says, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." When boundaries are ignored without consequence, respect erodes. She learns that your words are flexible and your standards are negotiable. What begins as emotional boundary crossing can escalate into manipulation, control, and chronic disrespect. The danger is not just what she does, but what you begin to accept. Spiritually, this dynamic weakens a man's authority. God calls men to lead with clarity and strength, not confusion and compromise. When you repeatedly explain boundaries instead of enforcing them, you step out of leadership and into negotiation. Love does not require you to abandon wisdom. Jesus himself walked away from situations and people who refused to honor truth. Boundaries are not unloving, they are honest. Over time, constant boundary violations create resentment. You may feel drained, unheard, and emotionally unsafe. Instead of peace, you experience anxiety. Instead of confidence, you second-guess yourself. This internal conflict affects every area of your life, from your work to your faith. Galatians 5:1 reminds us that Christ calls us to freedom, not bondage. A relationship that consistently pushes you beyond your limits is not freeing, it is controlling. A woman who respects you will honor your boundaries even when she doesn't fully understand them. She may ask questions, seek clarity, or express feelings, but she will not repeatedly cross lines you have clearly drawn. Respect shows up in behavior, not promises. When boundaries are ignored early in a relationship, they are rarely respected later. Time does not correct entitlement, it strengthens it. If a woman tests how much you will tolerate, she is not searching for love. She is measuring control, and whatever you allow at the beginning becomes the expectation moving forward. God never calls a man to endure disrespect in the name of love. Boundaries are a reflection of self-worth, and anyone who consistently violates them is showing you that they do not value you the way you deserve.